afternoon, everybody. If you're just joining us, welcome. We're excited that you're here today for ongoing observation in the virtual K-3 classroom. We have some great tips and tricks for you today to help. A couple of reminders on the screen that you'll see that are specific to Zoom. If you're not familiar with the Zoom platform, we're going to please make sure that you're muted. You can see the red arrow where that's pointing in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. And also to help save bandwidth, we're advising perhaps that you keep your webcam turned off. You'll find that button right next to it. We'll also be accessing the chat bar today. And you can see that looks like a little speech bubble in the middle of your screen. And in the chat bar right now, if you could take a minute and introduce yourself. Let us know where you're from, what your name is, and what your role is. Looks like we have a few more folks coming in. Thanks for being here again today. Welcome to Ongoing Observation in the K-3 virtual classroom. I'm joined today by my colleague, Heather Rotterman. Heather is an assessment and instruction consultant here at Wayne Risa, and my name is Bridget Regan. I'm a literacy consultant here at Wayne Risa. We also have our colleague working behind the scenes, Laura Gabrion, so thanks for being here today with us. Ladies, would you like to unmute for a moment and just say hello to everybody?
Hi, everyone. This is Heather. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, everyone. Laura Gabrion here. Happy Friday.
Thanks, ladies. Thanks for being here. Heather, would you take a moment? Would you mind reading? Let us know some of the folks that are in the house today before we jump into our content.
Looks like we got some teachers we have someone from Ida, and this is their 43rd year. Thank you, Carla. Grosse Pointe is here. Let's see, who else do we have? Livonia's here, Crestwood, Redford Union, River Rouge.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for being here today, everyone. As you're logging in, if you're just coming in, I'm going to put up just that screen we had just a moment ago about some Zoom reminders. Please make sure that you're muted, and if you could turn your webcam off, that tends to help a little bit with bandwidth. And we're also going to be using the chat bar this afternoon, so make sure you're able to locate that. And we are going to jump in and get started then. Again, my name is Bridget Regan. Heather Rotterman and I will be facilitating today. And we have our behind the scenes friend, Laura Gabrion, that will be helping and monitoring the chat. So as you have questions today, please feel free to put those things in the chat and Laura will alert us to those. With the stormy weather that we're having today, it's possible folks could get bumped out. If that happens, please just log back in and Laura will be happy to admit you back into the session. Also, today's session is being recorded. So if some of the content does get missed due to the weather or folks were not able to log on, you will have access to all of that content later. Today, our session titled Ongoing Observation in the Virtual K-3 Classroom has really three main learning outcomes. The first, as you can see on the screen, is to help us all really understand and think deeply about the power of using ongoing observation to inform our instruction. Secondly, we're going to talk a little bit about how you can use our Michigan K-12 ELA standards as a tool as you begin to develop an informal observation plan, right? We want to look to see what it is that our students are expected to know and be able to do. And then finally, we know, the reality of assessment in our state and that there are going to be some assessments that you may be required to give. So we're going to share some really just simple tips that we think might make that a little bit easier for you, depending on the teaching setting, if you're setting or virtual, or a little bit of both. We've also provided with you, and I'm going to ask Laura, she'll put this tiny URL for you in the chat. This is a note-taking guide for you that if you'd like to multitask and either you could print it out or you could take notes as we go along. We wanted to provide that with you. So Laura will go ahead and put that in the chat for us. You can use that as you go along. So to get started today, we really want to be thinking about the power of observation. And to do that, we want to get you into breakout rooms right away and give you a chance to start thinking about what this might mean given this prompt that's on the screen. So if you're not familiar with Zoom breakout rooms, in a minute, Laura is going to put us into breakout rooms. or perhaps that might be Heather doing that. And we'll go into rooms of about 4 or 5 people. You could just quickly introduce yourself. And then once you're in that breakout room, we'd like you to really reflect. This is kind of our opening activity to get us all thinking and frame our thinking for today. So given the school closure this past spring, what academic needs do students have as they return to school this fall? That's what we'd like you to talk a little bit about in your breakout room. So again, given the closure this past spring, what academic needs? And notice that we're focusing in on academic needs. We know our students are going to come with lots of needs, but for the next hour, we'd like to zoom in on those academic ones. What do you think students might need as they return to school this fall? Okay, Laura or Heather, one of you gals behind the scenes, if you could invite folks to the breakout room. When you're in the breakout room, we will set a timer and you will get a chance. We'll send you a message in the breakout room so you know how much time you have left, and then you'll be brought back to our group session. We'll probably be in the breakout rooms for about 4 to 5 minutes. All right, so when you're ready, Gail's behind the scenes, if you could invite people to the breakout room. If this is new to you, all you need to do is click on that blue button where it says join the breakout room, and you'll be in the room. We'll see you back in a few minutes.
No, a lot of the stuff that we talked about here, working on remediation, working on the RTI and the MTSS and doing out on that. I'm not a fan of the word reteach because the research out there says we should not do that. We need to bring them in and progress where they're going. We know the students are coming in behind because they haven't been in school for 6 months. So a lot of the words that are, a lot of that stuff. And I think the one that really stands out is struggle. A lot of kids are going to struggle because, one, they haven't been in school for 6 months. So getting back into the social aspect of what school is going to be a big component in going through all those routines because they have not had any routines. And I know that's more non-academic, but it still is the structure of school.
Absolutely. So we were thinking that some of these words would come up in the conversations that you're having. And we've heard them in various groups that we've been meeting with with RISA. So today we'd like to propose a new frame of thinking. And I want to invite you to consider this picture. What do you notice? You probably can see that there's a missing puzzle piece, making the puzzle incomplete. I would like you to consider the danger of having a deficit mindset about the knowledge, skills, practices, and attitudes that our students will bring to us this fall. Our first instinct may be to administer a battery of assessments to determine what students don't know or to pinpoint their gaps. There's a great deal of research that suggests that assessments that are embedded in instruction and done just in time may be more meaningful to help improve student learning and provide students with a better opportunity to show what they know and are able to do. So we don't want to assume that all students that enter our classrooms are puzzles with missing pieces. So let's consider this quote. I want you to take a moment to read it. What are some of your initial thoughts? So we're hoping that this quote provides a new perspective or a new lens in which we view our students. There is another danger of deficit thinking, and that it really is an equity issue for our most vulnerable and marginalized students. So while we may have some of these assumptions about our students, without evidence, we cannot reasonably say that they are true. We know that sometimes students push back, we know that sometimes our systems being things that we have to work within, push back against sound practices or what we know is right for our students. Assessment is one of those things that often bucks the system a bit with what we know is good for students. Often assessment happens because of accountability measures, legislation, what policymakers want, etc. We want to invite you to set aside the compliance piece of assessment and really focus in on what and how assessment can bring to light what a student can do. So what I'd like you to do is we're going to engage in a Mentimeter, and it's around this question of how might the observation of our students be impacted by our assumptions and or deficit thinking. So there's 3 ways to get to Mentimeter. You can do the first bullet, which is menti.com, and type in the code that's on the screen. Laura can put the link into the chat and you can directly get it from that. Or if you have a phone or mobile device near you, you can actually take a picture of the QR code.
So we'd like to invite folks to do that now then. Select one of those 3 ways. One of our goals during these sessions always is to model some other tools, virtual tools that you might be able to use with your own students, or perhaps if you're in a role where you're leading professional development, our goal is always to do that as well. And again, if you have questions about this or you're not sure, go ahead and feel free to put that in the chat, and Laura is behind the scenes and she can help you. So it looks like, Heather, we're already getting some things coming in. I can see the Mentimeter.
If you've never used it with students or with staff, what I like about it is right now it's anonymous. I have no idea who's putting what, but I can kind of get a really good idea of how people are thinking or what they're feeling based on its results. And this can be downloaded. So I can download the results and I can use this at another time if I need to revisit.
So we can already see, Heather, some of the things that are coming in here. Someone responded that bias, right? How might our observations of students be impacted? Here's another comment about judgment. That sometimes we might go into things with kind of a preset notion of what we're expecting to see without actually really looking to see what's really there. What are you noticing about some of the responses coming in?
I'm noticing, I just saw someone put low expectations. That quote really hits me hard when I, as a former EL director in a large district, a large EL population, that was often the case. We had a lot of folks that thought that kids couldn't access text if they didn't have the vocabulary or enough quote unquote English skills to access the text. So that hits me hard. And as we think about our own biases and our own assumptions about our students, if we think that they can't, then our students won't. So we really want to have those high expectations for kids. Great responses.
Thank you, everyone, for participating in Mentimeter here, and we encourage you to try that tool.
So assessment doesn't have to be what we traditionally think of as a pencil, paper, or a computer adaptive test. When done with purpose and intent, evidence gathering can yield a wealth of information about our students. Teachers must gather accurate evidence of a student's level of understanding in order to make appropriate instructional decisions and provide descriptive feedback to move that student forward. So this really means that our teachers need to use a variety of strategies and multiple opportunities to gather that evidence. There are 3 ways that teachers generally do this, and this is generally done within your practice. You're probably already doing these things. The first would be to gather evidence in a one-on-one conference with students or watching students engage with peers in discourse. The second could be examining student work. So looking at different work samples against the criteria, which would be our content standards or our learning intentions. And then the third, and that's what we're going to focus on today, is how we observe students. So what do we see students doing? These strategies can really provide students with the opportunity to show what they know and what they're able to do. And it helps provide us as teachers with evidence to inform our instructional next steps.
And whether you're in a completely virtual setting to start off the school year or a hybrid where kids are coming, sometimes and you have different groups of kids coming in and out, or you're in a fully face-to-face, it's important to remember that the research and the practices can all still be applied, right? We don't want to let go of those things simply because some of the things around us have changed. It's also important, I think, for us to remember that we didn't forget how to teach, right? Like we know, I'm not sure if folks are familiar with the book by Fisher, Fry, and Hattie that came out recently called The Distance Learning Playbook. Might be something you'd like to take a look at, but they really make the case that we're all still educators, right? We didn't forget how to teach, and we still need to hone in on those skills. And the same is true then with the essentials, right? The literacy essentials can still be our anchor as we begin to think about assessment. So we're going to turn to Dr. Tanya Wright, who's one of the authors of some of the essentials. And we're going to listen to what she has to say about language and literacy development, specifically around literacy essential number 9. So Heather, when you're ready, if you'd like to hit play, we can listen into what she has to say.
Essential 9 focuses on ongoing observation and assessment of children's language and literacy development that informs their education. And I want to focus on the words for Essential 9 that say that informs their education, because sometimes we get a little assessment crazy and we forget that the reason we're doing it is to inform children's education. So what's key is that we collect the necessary information to plan appropriate literacy instruction for each student. And we could use tests to gather this information, but there are also other really useful sources of information. For example, we can look at kids' work samples or portfolios of their work samples. You can look at a child's writing and learn a lot about what they understand about letter sound knowledge, for example. And also observations. How is a child speaking about text when we discuss it? How is a student using vocabulary that we might have taught? So there's a lot to be learned from tests, but there's also a lot to be learned from other sources of information. But what's key is we're interested in understanding where a child is in their literacy development so that we can think about what the most important instruction is for that student and help them make progress. When we think about the words that informs their education, there are also some things that we don't mean. So we're not really interested in collecting data for the sake of collecting data. Sometimes people get really excited about how much data they have. What we rather want is actually to be very strategic and collect the information we need to understand how a student is doing in their literacy development. We're also not interested in collecting data just to share with parents that we collect data. So sometimes you might attend a parent-teacher conference, for example, where the teacher says, look at all this data I have on your child. But that's not necessarily very helpful to the parent unless you can explain what in fact that tells us about the child as a learner and in their literacy development. We're also not interested in collecting data to figure out what is wrong with a child. So sometimes we get up to trying to figure out why this kid isn't learning or something like that. What's wrong with them? And that's really not the intent. What we are interested in using data for is to figure out what a child already knows, and we're super excited and want to celebrate that, and what a child needs to learn in order to make progress as a literacy learner. So I always want to emphasize that figuring out what's wrong with a child is not what we're up to when we're interested in collecting data and collecting literacy data. We're really focused on, as a teacher, what should I teach next to help this student make progress from wherever they are in their literacy development.
Okay, Dr. Wright really had a couple of key things that I just would like to emphasize. When she talks about that phrase, that informs their education, right? That should be our key purpose for collecting data. And she also mentioned different ways that might happen through looking at student work samples. Observation was another one that she mentioned. And that's what we're going to zoom in on today. I think as early L teachers, I have a background as an elementary principal, and I remember being just in awe each time I spent time in my pre-K and early L classrooms, because early L teachers are masters at observing children. And I think sometimes it's gotten in the way where we have felt as early L teachers that perhaps we shouldn't be spending our time doing that, observing kids, and seeing what they're doing. We need to have a standardized test to look at that. But now the essentials are giving us that permission. The essentials are saying, as you can see from that second bullet point, that a teacher will prioritize observation during actual reading and writing. So permission granted to do it. Remember that the literacy essentials are all backed in the research. And so we definitely want to be doing that as a practice. This slide here just outlines some of the key things that we heard Dr. Wright say, why we even bother to assess reading, right? We're really looking at their strengths. We're not looking at it from a deficit mindset. And we're looking to see what is it that our students need. And we're trying to do that and tailor the instruction in a way that's very detailed and informative. And we're going to provide you with some examples today that will show that. So I'm going to turn it over to Heather now, who's going to talk a little bit about how you might plan for an observation. Heather?
So observation and this sort of evidence gathering is really part of the formative assessment process. And anything that falls into the formative assessment process should be done with purpose and intent. So when we're thinking about gathering evidence on our students by observing, we want to watch with purpose. And that's really like what Bridget lifted earlier. It's really what our early L teachers do, and they do it just naturally. So we want to watch our students in their natural environment, whether it be in a remote setting virtually or in a hybrid or face-to-face. We want to make sure that we're creating an authentic assessment experience where we can see how a student would be engaging with their task. So we don't want to use, like what Dr. Wright was saying, we don't want to just collect data for the sake of collecting data. We want to collect this information so that we can move our students forward in their language and literacy development. So what should you observe? You should consider observing what you want to know about your students. So this should be part of an ongoing process, as mentioned earlier, but you really want to think about the skills, the knowledge, and behavior that you want to observe to see whether or not students are performing at or near grade level expectations. And so we really turn to the essentials, which is the research base and the knowledge of the K-12 ELA standards to have a deep understanding of the literacy and language development, but also a deep understanding of the content that has to be taught in that grade level. So thinking about how this can be part of your classroom practice and that it should be part of your classroom practice when you observe. Should you make an observation plan? Yes, because when we observe, it should be intentional. It's an intentional process to gain information. But remember, a plan has to be anchored in the needs of the students with grade level content expectations. So when you form that observation plan, you're really going to gain more information about the language and literacy practices that your students have so that you can help tailor your instruction. So when you have intent and you have purpose, your data is going to go a lot farther than if you were just observing to observe. So you should consider planning what you're going to observe, who, when and where, and how you're going to collect and document that observation information. And then that last bullet point is really, really crucial. How are you going to understand and use your observation evidence to move your instruction forward, or maybe tailor some instruction for your students? I have to make a point about this though, because even the most well-intended person can unwillingly bring in their own unconscious thoughts into observation. So to ensure that your observations are free of bias and assumptions, we need to take steps to ensure that when we observe our students, we're really gathering the most accurate evidence. So we can do this in a couple different ways. The first one is that we only write down what we actually see, not what we think we're seeing. And then we use descriptive words. So we're going to avoid words that are judgy. So for example, I might, my first instinct might be to write down that this child is a strong reader. Well, strong can mean a lot of different things. And is it my opinion that they're a strong reader? What are they doing that makes them a strong reader? So we really want to push you to use descriptive language. So describe what the reader can do. What is the reader using text features to determine the meaning because they referred to the text title explicitly? And then the last piece is we want to compare our students to content standards. What are the standards that are at grade level? We're not comparing our students to one another. So we want to really honor where our students are at so that we can move them forward in their language and literacy development. So as we think about these assumptions and we consider the deficit thinking, we really want to engage in this observation, which is why we invited you to consider what students are bringing to the classroom this year instead of the gaps that they might have. So to do this, we want to make sure that we are aware of our own assumptions. And this will really help to make sure that your observations are bias-free. But this ensures that our data is more accurate. It's a more equitable use of our data, so we're not pinpointing or marginalizing our students. And the better results will ultimately lead to better instructional decisions. So how do we do this? What does this look like? So this is student A. This is actually my daughter. Her name is Aubrey, but she is a third grader and her hobbies are dance, skiing, soccer, music. She loves unicorns, mermaids, anything with glitter. She likes to read graphic novels. She's really, really, really into science, loves anything rocks or insect related. Her previous assessment data, she had a 30 DRA score last January when she was in second grade, and she was in the 35th percentile on the winter NWEA reading. So we administered, we just gave her a text to read. It was a grade level text.
And if you take a look here, we mentioned earlier, Heather mentioned earlier that we want to be intentional about our plan, and it's certainly not to discredit. I'm thinking of sometimes, Heather, as a former fourth grade classroom teacher, when I would just sit back and observe my class, right, and just kind of see what was happening. But I think perhaps at times now that I reflect back on it, I missed out on this type of intentional observing that we're going to see in just a minute with the video clip. And so we'd like you to consider how you might use the standards that students have to know and be able to do as that tool to be intentional. So one of the challenges that we know teachers are going to face this fall is potentially starting with new students that you don't know, right? And additionally, it's possible you're not going to have solid assessment data from last spring or perhaps even early on in the fall. And so in this clip that we're going to show you, the teacher, in this case, Heather, turned back. She knows that as a teacher, she's going to need to teach Reading Information Standard 3.2, determining the main idea. And I'm sure we can all attest to that this is a challenging standard to teach, right? And that it has many layers and components. And so what Heather does then in this clip is she actually returns to the second grade standard to see what it is, what it is in this case, Aubrey is able to know, is able to do with a topic. We are using the text from EPIC. On that slide before, you saw the text and you're about to see that. If you're not familiar with EPIC, we encourage you to take a look at EPIC. It's a free online digital tool that can be leveled. You can search things by level, by topic, by interest, and it's a really, really nice source. So there's that example of EPIC again on the screen. And then here's what we'd like you to do as you watch the video. We'd like you to consider what does student A know? What is she able to do? So rather than thinking about it from a deficit thinking, what she can't do, what does she know and is she able to do in terms of language and literacy and development? And what might be your next move instructionally? All right, so Heather, with no further ado, let's go ahead and we'll watch the conference. And we're going to invite you to just jot some notes or be thinking about those things as you're watching.
Hi, Aubrey.
Hi.
Can you read this passage out loud for me? If you come to a word you don't know, I'd like you to use any strategies that you can to sound that word out or try and figure that word out, or you can even ask for help, okay? Okay, whenever you're ready, go ahead and begin.
From the safety of your house, you watch the clouds. You see rain falling in a flash of lightning. Seconds later, you hear crackling thunder. The thunder side of the thundercloud bulges and twists around itself. The bulge begins to spin faster and faster. Soon a cone-like shape drops from the cloud. This shape is called a funnel cloud. As the funnel cloud stretches downward, you hear a rushing sound. The tip of your funnel waves dances above the ground for a moment. It looks as through thought it would return to the clouds. Suddenly, the tip drops down and touching the ground. A dark cloud folds up from spinning cone. Dirt and dust are sucked into its dimly turned cone dark gray. You hear a sound like a
Great.
Right train getting louder and louder, coming right at you. The funnel cloud has become a tornado.
Wow. Aubrey, do you think you can tell me what that passage was about? What was it about?
It was about a cloud getting bigger, like a tornado.
Okay. So if I look at the second paragraph starts with, as the funnel cloud. Can you tell me what that paragraph was about?
It was you can hear a rushing sound
Okay.
coming toward you.
Okay.
So what we'd like to do now is we're going to invite you back into breakout rooms, and we'd like you to consider those questions that we had on the screen for you. What is it that the student knows? What could you glean that she knows and is able to do in terms of her language and literacy development? And just with that little clip that you saw, what do you think might be your next move instructionally? Keeping in mind the standard that you were looking at. You were checking to see the second grade standard said, can the student identify the main topic of a multi-paragraph text, as well as the focus of each specific paragraph within the text? You notice that Heather prompted her to look specifically at that one paragraph. So we're gonna ask, I think Laura's gonna put us in breakout rooms and take a minute and discuss those two things. So what would be your next move instructionally for her? And what did you learn about Aubrey as a reader? What were you able to take away? When your invite comes up, you can click join and jump right into the meeting.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. Would anyone like to share, unmute and share what your group discussed, what student A or my daughter Aubrey is able, what she knows and what she's able to do as a reader, and what your next steps might be instructionally?
I think folks are being a little shy today, or maybe it's the rainy weather, I'm not sure.
All right, I'll say a little bit. I think she was focused on the overall gist of the piece, and I think that she kept that in mind while she was reading. But on the paragraph by paragraph level, I think she didn't realize like the slightly different focus of the piece.
Yep, absolutely. I would agree. Would anyone else like to share?
Our group also talked about how she was a fairly fluent reader, and she kind of like went through, kind of breezed through the passage. However, we noticed that there was kind of like there was a lack of focus on the punctuation, and that possibly with some support with heating punctuation, that might help with her understanding of like the main idea and paragraph by paragraph.
Absolutely, absolutely. So those are some really good next steps that we could do, and we could easily embed those into our grade level content, right? Those are easily embeddable, especially if we're thinking about small group instruction, if we're engaging, if we're grouping our students by a strategy. Like we might notice that a lot of our students, when we observe them, have that same difficulty. Thank you. So this is the observation plan that I created when I was working with Aubrey, but this would be one that you could easily create if you're working with your students. So what am I looking to observe? And so I actually was intentional and typed out, this is what I was looking to do. I looked at the second grade standard and at the third grade standard and the progression between those standards. What are students expected to know and be able to do? Who do I want to observe? When am I going to do it? Where am I going to do it? How am I going to collect that evidence? So I had an informal running record. I had a printout of that passage, and I kind of just made my notes on that passage as she was reading. I did notice the same things. She kind of didn't really stop with punctuation. And then how do I make sense of that evidence? So once all of my evidence is collected on my students, I have to really dig deep and figure out where are my patterns and where are my trends, because that will help me with my instruction, moving my instruction forward, but can also help me to identify areas of need within my classroom. So if I'm grouping students, it could be a simple lesson to, okay, remember the punctuation? What does punctuation tell us? And when we are reading, what does it do when we're reading? So this was just my sample plan. And then this is another, this is a tracking form that I created that I would have used if I was doing this with all of my students. So were my students able to do it? So here I just kind of mocked up some data so that you could see what it would look like. But in this case, I'm looking at, are they able to provide the main topic of the informational text? Again, then could they provide the specific focus for each paragraph? So, and I had my own coding system as a yes or a not yet or absent if the student was absent that day. And then just some notes. And this will help me as a teacher to think about what I have to do for my students next in terms of their language and literacy development as it pertains to the K-12 content standards.
I could interject for a minute, Heather, too, on that. What I really love about that, having that all charted, so in theory, if you were to take the time the first few weeks of school to do a similar passage like that with all your students, right, a grade level text to see what they're knowing, what they can know and are able to do, you're then able to think about how you might form your groups, right? I'm thinking back to the session you and I facilitated a few days ago, and how you might cluster kids together based on their need and then provide some more targeted instruction around whatever that particular need is for those kids.
Absolutely. And so one thing that I'm going to point out too is that our computer adaptive tests like NWEA or iReady, they don't ask a student to read a passage out loud. They're not asking a student to engage in something like this. So we're actually gleaning a lot of information about our students when we do a formal observation, even our informal observations. So remember I said earlier that in order for us to really make the most of our time with our students, especially knowing that we had to cut last year short, we want to make sure that we're gathering as much accurate information about our students to make the best instructional decisions as we move forward. We're not going to go back and teach the previous year's curriculum. We don't have time for that, right? So if we're going to use the evidence that collected to review part of that standard, how do we embed that and weave it into the third grade content, and knowing that that might be a need? And that's where that art and science of teaching comes in. Knowing that that might be a need, and like Bridget lifted, how do we maybe form our small groups, or how do we provide additional targeted support because we don't have time to teach a previous year's curriculum. So we came up with some tips for how to administer some other common K-3 literacy assessments, especially knowing that there are going to be probably some district mandated assessments that you do have to engage in.
Absolutely. So we knew that we would be remiss if we did not at least include something along these lines, right? This session, all along has been really making the case for observation, right? And perhaps having an intentional plan. But we'd also like to suggest how you might use some of these assessments that perhaps you're required to use, and show you some ways that it might look. So let's take, for example, high frequency words. You'll see we're actually going to watch a clip in a minute of a teacher and a student where the teacher is administering that in a virtual setting. So we tried to think of some practical tips. For example, the use of flashcards if you're doing high frequency words, chunking portions of the list. So if you're engaging in a small group literacy session with students, perhaps you take some time at the end of that session to have each student read the first 15 words on that list during that small group time. And then the next time they come back together, you have them read the next set of 15 on the list. Some simple things like, it's pretty common, especially in our kindergarten classrooms, to assess letter and sound identification at the beginning of the year. And depending on what system you're using, sometimes, for example, I know that with one of the systems, all of the letters are listed on one, sheet of paper, and you're sitting side by side with the child, typically in person, and you're sliding the ruler down as they read those. Well, obviously that's not going to work in a virtual setting. So we tried to think of tips like, well, in this case, then you need to use flashcards and hold them up and orally prompt, right? how you might be able to use and schedule one-on-one conferences. So that's what this slide is all about, just some practical tips that we thought might be helpful for you as you're getting ready to engage, and most likely you'll be required to do some of these assessments as well. And we're going to make sure either if you want to snap a photo of this so you don't lose sight of this information, when you do get the follow-up email from us on Monday, it will include this, this recording, but we're also planning to include some of the tools as well, and this will be one of those. But before we move on to the next one, if you want to snap a photo, please feel free to do so. In that, considering that, we'd also like to show you a quick little, oops, here we go, quick little clip of this happening of high frequency words. So go ahead, Heather, we're ready.
So again, my daughter is the star of yet another video, poor thing. But I did a quick high frequency words. I pulled from the, I don't remember if it's Fry or if it was Dolch. I think it's the Fry frequency word list for 3rd grade. And I just picked the first 10.
We're going to go through a couple words, and I just want to see which words you know. So when I hold up a word, can you read the word for me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, ready?
Mm-hmm. Hi. Every. Near. Add. Food. Between. Own. Below. Country. Plant.
Hey, that's it. Nice work.
I'm sure you could see then from watching that clip how you could translate that to different assessments. With sound identification, for example, you could have picture prompts asking the student to say, the beginning sound that they hear. When we get to things like rhyme and syllabication, again, you could schedule breakout rooms and or do it in your small group, right, to teach students the skill. If you're a kindergarten teacher and you have to assess their concepts about print at the top, again, typically the students are holding a book that you give them, right? So perhaps you could do that by them having them find a book in their home, and you could be one-on-one with them, and you would prompt them to say, can you show me how you hold that book? Or where is the title? Can you point to the title? Show me where there's a word on one of the pages, and you'd be able to see it. Yes, it would be a little tricky. We get it's not the same as being sitting next to a child, but it is perhaps a way that you could do that. Finally, at the bottom, you could do sentence dictation, and the sentence dictation could be something that you could perhaps administer whole group, or even in a small group. You as the teacher, the students would have to have the writing material, and then students could submit a photo through whatever your learning management system is, and upload that work, so that you would have, that would be another way for you to assess where your students are at by looking at student work. So it takes a little bit of creativity, perhaps a little thinking out of the box. The last thing to add before we wrap up is that some of the benchmarking systems, depending on which system you're using, offer some virtual options where the books are already have been digitized. I know that is true for DRA. I'm not quite certain yet about the Fontes and Pinnell system, but it's something to look into. All right, I'm going to turn it back over to Heather, and she's going to kind of wrap things up for us.
So we do have 2 bonus split sessions that are going to be happening next week. An overview of the Michigan e-library for secondary and elementary teachers, and both are free. So if you're interested, Laura's going to pop the link to those if you're interested in that in the chat.
I think it's important to note, Heather, that the sessions are free, but also the tools are free. The Michigan e-library is a free resource to all Michigan educators. So if you're able to log on for those days, we encourage you to join in.
And there's lots of text that's available. So even if you don't have, you aren't able to get a license to for digital text, or your district doesn't want you to use Epic for whatever reason, the Michigan eLibrary, there's Go Pebble that's in there, and they have high quality full text sets available. This is the last of our Learning Blitz. We have one more on Monday, and in addition to our bonus blitzes that are happening. We just want to say thank you for joining us this afternoon, and we hope that you found the information valuable and helpful as you think about how you might gain information about your students in terms of just observing with intent as they come to you this fall. Remember, we're not just collecting data for the sake of collecting data. We really want to honor where our students are coming in as readers and writers, and how we can help move them forward in their language and literacy development. If you have any questions, we're happy to stay on the line. We thank you for your time today.
Thanks so much for being here today, everyone. Just a reminder, you can go to our lln.risa.net, professional learning, and you'll find all of the many recordings from all of the sessions we've done this past month are all there. So if there were some that you missed, that you didn't get a chance to do, they're on our website and available for you to do that. Again, that's lln.risa.net, and you just click on the professional learning tab. And again, we'll stay, and thanks, Laura, just put that in the chat for everybody. We'll stay on the call for a little bit in case folks have specific questions and are perhaps interested in facilitating some of this work back in their own district. Have a great day, everyone. Be well.